Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody, where today we are talking about one signing to win your club the Premier League. Coming up, does Alexander Isak actually guarantee Liverpool the title?
It really pushes them from sort of title favourites to, you're looking at this league and thinking, I don't see how Liverpool are stopped.
Should Arsenal sign Rafael instead of Eberechi Eze? And you look at his physical attributes, you look at his pace, you look at his directness. I think he looks tailor-made for the Premier League. And who is the perfect goalkeeping upgrade for Chelsea?
As a impactful goalkeeping arrival, Gianluigi Donnarumma would be one of the biggest names you could think of straight away.
Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody. Joining myself and Mikey McCubbin today, we've got Joe Thomlinson. Welcome back, Joe. Guys, we've got a big episode today. The Premier League is nearly back. Today we're talking all things title race. We are talking about one signing that could win your side the title. Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, Man City, the main contenders. There could be a surprise, but the main contenders. What we're going to do is, me and Joe are going to suggest one signing each for those four clubs. Mikey, you have the role of sporting director.
Yes.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. I've got some ideas about the kind of positions and the kind of talents that I would want to be seeing at these clubs. Will they push the needle to being title favourites, to being more serious title contenders? That's up for you guys. Up to you guys. You know how strong your candidates are, and I'll have ultimate say.
May the best man win.
May the best man win. Yeah.
Let's do it. Okay, let's kick off with the current champions, Liverpool. Joe, there's a lot of speculation about a certain Swedish striker.
Well, am I allowed to pitch Alexander Isak?
You can. Yeah, absolutely.
Then I'm going to pitch Alexander Isak. I mean, let's talk about this transfer, right? Because it is the talk of the town, isn't it? At the moment, obviously Newcastle fans not too happy, but it does feel like this has serious legs, which I think personally I'm extremely surprised about. I think at the start of the summer there was very little chance in my head that Isak left Newcastle, but I think the stance he's taken, not flying on pre-season tour to Singapore with Newcastle, is kind of putting quite a lot of pressure on the club to make a decision as to whether they keep him or try to reintegrate him. It's not going to be easy to reintegrate an unhappy player, and I think Liverpool have put themselves in an extremely powerful position here with the sale of Luis Diaz, other players expected to leave the club like Darwin Núñez. It feels like they might well have the funds to get this deal over the line, and we are talking about maybe the most well-rounded striker in the Premier League over the last couple of years. Certainly Erling Haaland's numbers are ahead of him, but in terms of an all-round package, his link-up play, his ability on the ball in deep-lying areas, you think puts him slightly ahead as an overall footballer, maybe. And there's been some question marks, I think, hasn't there, about his fitness record. I've seen people saying, 120, 130 million pounds, a lot of money to spend on a player with this injury record. And I think, I wonder if it's a little bit of a myth, the injury record. 34 starts last season. There's only been one season since he went to Real Sociedad where he's put up less than 30 league appearances. So yes, he might not have started loads in some of those seasons, but he's bedded himself in certain times. He's played a lot of minutes for a 25-year-old. And Liverpool, with Ekitike there, with Salah, with Wirtz, with other options in that forward area, if he was to miss 5 games, I don't think it would be the end of the world. I think it's actually an ideal situation for him, a club that has that many options when he doesn't necessarily have to start 38 games, play every single minute and be the focal point. I think as an all-round package, this is one of the scariest transfers I can remember in Premier League history. The thought of Isak going to Liverpool, honestly, I'm terrified.
I guess my one question would be, with Isak, I agree, really scary transfer, makes the Liverpool forward line maybe the most exciting in the world in terms of the talent that's in there, in terms of the different combinations you can have in there. Wirtz being able to play in the centre end on the left, Salah, of course, if he carries on his form from last season. Two strikers of the calibre of Ekitike and Isak up top. The options are amazing. All they're really missing now is an elite specialist left winger. But my one question would be, if this episode is called One Signing to Win Your Side the Title, if Liverpool could only make one signing between now and September to make their their status as title favourites, I think, more solid, is a striker, no matter how good that striker is a striker actually who they should be going for? Because I'm seeing particularly, a lack of depth at centre-back, which as sporting director does concern me.
Well, first and foremost, I think the move for Isak doesn't necessarily rule out a move for a centre-back. I think there are options in the market that have been linked with Liverpool in the past that could still join Liverpool. You know, Marc Guehi, I don't think is too far-fetched. And yes, we would be talking about record amounts of money being spent here. But Liverpool, the way PSR is set up, the way they have worked from a commercial standpoint, the revenue they've taken from trophies, the revenue they've taken in from sales already this summer, which will surpass £150 million, you'd think by the time this window is wrapped up, they're in a position to spend that. So they can go out and sign a centre-back and Isak. And I think what Isak does is it really pushes them from sort of title favourites to, you're looking at this league and thinking, I don't see how Liverpool are stopped. The amount of assets they would have in those forward areas. If Mo Salah is going for a little bit of a down spell, how do you then stop Isak scoring? Ekitike being able to function as a second striker, as a number 9, potentially also slightly wider if he has to. Florian Wirtz, you know, it's almost now, because of the Isak news is so big, we're forgetting that they've spent 120 million on Florian Wirtz. Like, is that just slipping away in people's minds? He's maybe the most exciting young talent in world football that was achievable this summer. I am terrified at the prospect of Liverpool, and I really think this Alexander Isak story feels like it has serious legs. I don't see any other options in the market for him, which I think is a big benefit for Liverpool, and it feels like he's pushed Newcastle into a position where they've got to make a decision on this.
I agree. I don't think he'd have gone public if he didn't think there was a reasonable possibility of joining Liverpool, because as you say, at the time, Arsenal were completing that deal for Gyökeres. It doesn't feel like Barcelona are in the position to get him. Man United, Chelsea, etc. They're not in the position to get him. Real Madrid, unless Vinicius Jr. left, would they bring in Alexander Isak this summer, this late in the window? Probably not. So it does feel like he's making a play for Liverpool, and I do actually expect that deal to get done, although I've got no of my own information. And obviously, people are saying they've got so many options, and they do. But with Luis Diaz having already left, the tragic passing of Diogo Jota and Darwin Núñez expected to leave as well, that's Ekitike, Isak and Wirtz in, and 3 players, you know, sadly no longer available in Diogo Jota's case, and 2 players having left. So they do have an amazingly deep squad, and they've taken up that favourites tag. And I think Isak, I agree with you, makes them overwhelming favourites, I would say. On the note of other areas, their squad, though, that's kind of where I went with this. And I think I've got a losing battle, because obviously Alexander Isak is the more sort of attractive offer. But I do think they will probably sign a centre-back. I think Marc Guehi seems like to be very high up their list. But I actually think they could potentially strengthen in midfield too. You know, Ryan Gravenberch started 37 of 38 league games last year. Only Caicedo and Bruno Guimaraes played more minutes amongst Premier League midfielders last year. And Ryan Gravenberch has previously had some injury issues as well in the past. So is that necessarily going to be replicable next year? I'm not so sure. Wataru Endo's clearly not an Arne Slot player, or at least on the basis of how much he played last year, it doesn't seem to be. So I think they need a kind of 6 cover who could potentially play at 8 as well. And that's why I think they should have a look at Lucien Agoumé, who is Sevilla's 23-year-old midfielder who was linked very strongly with Arsenal at the start of this window as a Thomas Partey replacement. I think it was when they were considering basically Norgard or Agoume. I think they were obviously always going to sign Zubimendi, but he was going to be that second midfield option. And you might not have heard that much about Agoume because last year was his real breakout campaign, but he came through the academy of Sochaux, which is the club that Ibrahima Konate came through and Marcus Thuram came through. He then joins Inter Milan in 2020, which is when Antonio Conte was at the helm, spending a lot of money, a lot of midfield resources. You know, they were bringing in Barella at a similar sort of time as well. And he didn't really get much game time. He was sent out on a series of loans to Spezia and Brest and Troyes. And then the year before last, Sevilla played a little bit. Last year, a really key part of their squad. And Sevilla were dreadful last year. They nearly got relegated. It really went under the radar in England how bad they were. There was only one of their players scored over 4 league goals, which was Dodi Luca Bacchio. And they really nearly went down. But Agoume, in a really poor side, absolutely excelled. So despite ranking 9th for league minutes in that team, he ranked 1st for passes into the final third in that team, 1st for progressive passes, 2nd for defensive actions. In fact, for defensive actions completed, so that's tackles or interceptions, he ranked 14th in Spain for a guy that only started around 24 league games as well. It's really pretty impressive. And what is impressive about Agoume is he's not just a destroyer, he's not just a passer, his dribbling is fantastic as well. Last year, he completed over 70% of his dribbles. For context, Ryan Gravenberch, who everyone thinks of as this amazing press evader, and he is, but he completed around 45%. So there's a huge gulf there. And look, Agoume hasn't played as much football as Gravenberch last year. He's not been playing at the same level. But for someone to alternate with Ryan Gravenberch, who feels achievable for 25 million euros, I would say, maybe even a tiny bit less, given Sevilla's financial situation and given the fact they've struggled so much over the last few years, I think he'd be a really smart pickup. But obviously, I do see that Alexander Isak versus Lucien Agoumé, I'm in an uphill battle.
I'm surprised you went for the defensive midfielder over the centre-back, it has to be said. Like, I was also looking at Costa. I think he would be a really exciting option in that defensive line. But with Alexander Isak available, like...
Yeah, he's
the guy.
Like, going into this as sporting director, I was mainly looking at centre-back. I do love Alexander Isak, obviously. I think Agoume would be a really smart pickup as well. But I also feel like if Liverpool were to be concerned about central midfield, we would have heard more by now. And at the start of the summer, I really thought that Liverpool should be prioritising a central midfielder. But for whatever reason, it really does feel like Arne Slot is happy with that midfield. I think Curtis Jones is going to have a really big role to play next year. Obviously, if Gravenberch or McAllister gets injured, then that, there are issues there for sure. But they're so overpowered up top that I think, Szoboszlai can drop deeper. There's enough options there. Whereas, at centre-back, I just think, that they could struggle, especially with the future of Konate up in the air.
I should have pitched
beyond, So someone like Lucaba, obviously like Marc Guehi as well. Obviously at the start of the summer, someone like Dean Howson, would have been a perfect pickup for Liverpool. I'm going to give it to Isak though. Yeah, I'm going to give it to Isak. I just think, it's an opportunity right now, right? And I think the thing is with the Isak situation is that Newcastle could still just not sell him. Newcastle still have that power.
Though, isn't it? That is difficult. It's a difficult situation to be in because the player is still very powerful despite the fact he's under contract for a long period.
Of course, but so was Harry Kane at Tottenham back in, 2021? These clubs can hold on to their players. Like, it's still possible. And if Newcastle are determined for Isak not to join a Premier League rival and instead go for a bit cheaper to a European power next summer, then that is in the realms of possibility. And, Isak would then have to contend with, becoming disliked at the club and by the fans. So like the club, like Newcastle do still hold power. Obviously they stand to make a huge fee out of him.
That's it as well.
If he comes to
the fee
Liverpool.
will never be as good as this summer because his contract will obviously be a year less as well. And there is still an opportunity to bring in someone like Benjamin Šeško, who feels like quite a unique market.
But they need to move quite fast. They do need to move quite fast on that.
Well, United, it doesn't feel like can move that fast. So I think if Isak does go, Šeško feels like a bit of a tap in for them. And look, Leipzig will get a huge amount of money because they've got such a good negotiating position given Newcastle's desperation and given the fact other clubs have been interested in Šeško. And then you look at Ugo Ekitike's price for Liverpool, like Šeško, Leipzig are just going to say, like, this is what you need to pay, do it. But Šeško, they've missed out on Gyökeres, they've missed out on Ekitike. Like, the market is smaller and smaller in terms of these really top strikers. So if I was Newcastle, I'd maximise the sale of Isak and bring in Šeško.
Well, let's see what happens with that. But yeah, Isak to Liverpool would be a scary one. Okay, let's move on to Arsenal now. In my opinion, the biggest challenges to Liverpool this season, I would say. I think they've got the most settled squad. I think they've made some really smart transfers so far this summer. I think obviously a lot rides on Gyökeres here. If Gyökeres doesn't live up to expectations, then we'll have to revisit their status. But if Gyökeres is a striker capable of scoring up to 20 Premier League goals or more, then I think that does bring a completely new dynamic to that Arsenal attack. Madueke as well, first time that they've had a really, really strong backup to Bukayo Saka. The left wing is where I'm probably looking at as sporting director. I think there are other areas of the squad that could be looked at as well, whether you're thinking about a left back to take over from Miles Lewis-Skelly if you want to move him into midfield eventually. That doesn't feel like the most pressing concern at the moment, though. Yeah, left wing feels like the most likely place where Arsenal are going to go next. Obviously, Eze still a possibility. The Rodrigo chat's gone a little bit quiet. I've heard, fans, bigging up someone like Rafael as an option. I don't know where you guys have gone with this. Have you gone for a future world beater? Have you gone for someone who can cover multiple positions? Let's start with you, Dougie, this time.
Well, you mentioned him there. I've gone big. I've gone with Rafael. Okay. I do think it's actually something that Arsenal should be considering. Do I think it's going to get done? No. I think they're going to sign Eze, and that's probably them done in terms of the winger central midfield area after bringing in Madueke. But if they'd done this a few months ago, I'd be even more excited about their title prospects this season. I do think it could have been done. And I think Rafael is actually quite underrated in this country because he's had some underwhelming Champions League games on the biggest stage. But I think if you've watched him consistently over the last few years, and you look at his physical attributes, you look at his pace, you look at his directness, I think he looks tailor-made for the Premier League. And across his entire Milan career, he's at 0.5 goals and assists per game. Vinicius Jr., who admittedly joined Real Madrid slightly younger than Leao did Milan, he's at 0.6. So he's not far off Vinicius Jr.'s level of consistency over the last few years. Like, he scored and assisted, I think it was 10 goals in his final season at Lille, then 8 in his first year at Milan. But since then, 13, 26, 31, 29, and last year 25 in terms of goals and assists. Across the last 4 seasons, since Martinelli's become a regular at Arsenal, he's averaged 13.5 league goals and assists per season. Leao is at 19.5. And Milan haven't been as good as Arsenal for a lot of that time. Like, last year they finished 8th. It was their first year outside the top 4 since 2019-20. It was their joint lowest points tally since 2015-16. And Leao, even in a down season where he fell out with Fonseca, where Milan changed manager, well, eventually twice, because Sergio Conceição was fired as well. Miserable season for Milan. He still contributes 25 goals and assists in all competitions. And you look under the sort of the hood, as it were, in terms of his numbers, he's at 4.5 shot creating actions per 90. Salah last year was at 4.6. So this is a really, really decisive player. He's got the physical attributes to succeed in the Premier League. I think he's very two-footed. He's confident in himself, often to his own detriment. It does feel like he couldn't handle Fonseca wanting to be a little bit ruthless with him, benching him when he wasn't performing well enough. He sort of kicked his toys out of the pram. Eventually, Milan sort of sided with Rafael and Theo Hernandez over Fonseca, and Theo Hernandez has now left the club. Max Allegri wants to make Rafael a real cornerstone of this team going forward, which is the intelligent move to do, because only Christian Pulisic contributed more league goals and assists last year. And Milan have had a difficult summer in terms of losing Theo Hernandez and Reinders. But I think some of the signings that they've made in terms of Samuel Ricci from Torino, Modric coming in as well, they're looking at Jashari from Club Brugge. Like, Milan look like they're shopping in interesting places right now, and you'd expect a huge upturn on 8th. Like, Max Allegri just won't be finishing 8th with Milan next year. So it's a difficult one to do, but he's got 3 years left on his current contract. And Milan's record sales ever are Kaka is their record sale ever for 67 million euros. Reinders went for under 50 million pounds in the end. Tonali was about 50 million pounds. If Arsenal, in a hypothetical scenario, offered 70 million pounds to Milan right now, I wonder whether they'd be tempted. And I do think Rafael is not maybe quite at the level of Rodrigo, but if you can't get Rodrigo and it proves too expensive, then I think Rafael feels like a surer bet than someone like Nico Williams, even if he doesn't have as big a future, because Nico Williams is that bit younger.
It was a good pitch.
Thank you.
Was a good pitch.
Really good pitch.
Joe, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think Rafael's a really interesting shout for Arsenal, but I don't necessarily think that is the route that Arteta is looking at for that signing. I think he's looking for this sort of hybrid option that can fit as not just a wide player, but could also invert and play as a secondary number 10, could support Odegaard in that role. And I think that's the reason Eze is so high on that list, because his functionality is so wide. He's got Premier League experience. You know, if it wasn't for his fitness record, I think he would have breezed 20 goal involvements quite comfortably. He, for me, is still the outstanding option, Eberechi Eze, but we've spoken about it on this show plenty of times. I'm a little bit surprised, to be honest with you, that Arsenal aren't, at least to some level, in the hunt for Xavi Simons. I think Xavi Simons is starting to become almost like a market opportunity. We're seeing fees of around 50 million euros being talked about for a player that 12 months ago was really hot property, to the level we were thinking this could be an explosion of a superstar here. That first season at Leipzig where he went absolutely supernova. I think last campaign, if it wasn't for that ankle injury which scuppered him for 2 or 3 months, we would have been saying similar sorts of things. He's super versatile. He can play as a number 10. He can play out wide, very two-footed, similar to Eze in that sort of ability to strike from range and dribble past players for fun, but maybe even cheaper, younger. I'm surprised Arsenal aren't interested in Xavi Simons to some level, but it feels like Chelsea are going to get that deal done. So I would just stick with Eze.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be my pitch. I think the idea is correct. I like the idea that he can play and support Martin Odegaard in an advanced capacity. I like his ball carrying from midfield as well. His goal involvements have jumped season on season on season, despite the fact he's had injury issues. And he has, most importantly, a release clause. I think in this modern market, especially the later it goes in the window, players' values start to increase because teams struggle to replace them with time on the clock. If he's got a release clause, set was it £68 million? I think it's 60 plus 8. There's rumours that has to be triggered before the start of the Premier League season. if it's £60 million in the market, we've seen players move for, the likes of Kudus move for a similar amount. Morgan Gibbs-White was being agreed at a similar sort of amount, and Burmo, Cunha, Elanga. I think Eze's worth it. I really think Eze's worth it. I think overall he lifts the quality of the squad. He not only lifts the floor of the squad, but he really improves the ceiling as well. And we've seen Martin Odegaard last season struggle with injury. Behind him, yes, Ethan Nwaneri can arrive. We've seen the emergence of Max Dowman as well, but a player like Eze, his functionality is just so wide. I think this is a fantastic option for Arsenal. I also think off the field is not spoken about enough, by the way, and the character and personality Eze provides to a dressing room is key, and that's clearly something Arteta's looked to recruit.
Yeah, okay, this is a really tough one. Really tough one. I loved the Leao shout. I think that was a really great pitch, Dukes.
Oh, thank you, Mikey.
And I think you're right. I think Leao has become really underrated.
The one thing I was worried about, was do you think I'm underestimating how much he costs? Do you think £70 million is too low for Leao?
It's hard to say because no one's come in with a serious offer for him so far this summer. But I would, given that Milan have already sold Reinders this summer, given that no club has really made a serious play for Leao and turned his head so far this summer as well, potentially, Milan could charge almost anything for him, especially given how big he is in Allegri's plans, given how important he's been to the club over the years, given the need for Milan to bounce back next season. I think you could stumble into difficult territory there. But that's not to say, you look at the money that Liverpool have spent on top targets this summer. Look at the reinforcements that City have made all over the field. I think, Arsenal, they got a decent price in the end for Gyökeres as well. I don't think Arsenal should sniff at spending, up to 80, 90 million pounds on a left winger. I don't think that's the case. I think this all the priority needs to be on stylistic fit, on, how much upturn there is in terms of goals and assists coming off the left-hand side. And I think as well, character. And that's my one worry with Leao, is does he pass the personality test with Arteta, given the problems he had with Fonseca last year at Milan, given that he'd be coming to the Premier League for the first time, given that he's really been the main man at that club for a long time, and is then stepping into an Arsenal setup where there are already some very, very big characters and you've really got to get in line quite quickly. And that's where I think actually Eze edges it. Not just the versatility, because I think the versatility is there. Coming into this, I was actually thinking, I do like Leao in terms of the fact that he is just a bit more of a like for like with Martinelli. But I do think the fact that Eze's been spoken about so much and he's clearly such a top target for Arsenal, I think suggests that there is, I don't know, I think it's a vote of confidence in Martinelli. I think Martinelli's got one more season at Arsenal to really prove that he's a top-class left winger, because we've seen it in seasons past, and he's certainly capable of getting back there. His underlying numbers last year were actually very impressive, and bringing someone like Eze, who is just, is the upgrade on Trossard rather than the upgrade on Martinelli, I think just gives Arteta more options. I also am pretty convinced that Eze can play as a wide left winger for Arsenal. I think there were people doubt it, but actually, I know he's played more as an inside forward for Palace, and that's where his best football has been. But we've seen him play wide. We even saw him play at wing back for England and do a good job there. I think he's fully capable of playing more wide too. So Eze just
2-0.
About edges it. 2-0. Dougie, you've got it all to do in the last two.
Oh, it's challenging.
But
Joe's going for tapping FC over there.
Let's move on to Chelsea now. Now, there are deals that are kind of in the process of getting done. Yoel Hato and Xavi Simons, both, bolstering that left-hand side really, really nicely, I think. I think Hato's a brilliant, utility player in that defence in terms of being able to play centre-back and backing up Marc Cucurella as well on the left. Which
is needed. Cucurella, I didn't actually realise the amount of minutes the guy played last year was huge.
Yeah, massive.
I think he started 70 games.
And Champions League football as well we need to think about with Chelsea now. And Xavi Simons, again, a really interesting option in there, though, remains to be seen how many minutes he'll actually get, between him and Gittins. Enzo Maresca likes someone to stay wide in that left-hand position. Xavi Simons, I don't think is he going to displace Cole Palmer? Certainly add some healthy competition there, but we'll see how that goes. Probably centre-back and goalkeeper are where I'm looking at as sporting director. going into this last month of the transfer window. Dougie, as you're chasing
I'll
let you go first. Where are you thinking?
I went straight to goalkeeper. I do think that is the one position that really doesn't just make me think that Chelsea can't challenge necessarily next season, but maybe we just don't know how good Penders is going to be in the future as well. Let's see how that loan goes to Strasbourg. They've obviously sold Petrovic to Bournemouth. For me, would have been probably Chelsea's best goalkeeper this season if he'd stayed. I understand that Robert Sanchez had a good end to the season. I understand he had a good Club World Cup. But I think individual mistakes last year cost Chelsea at least 5 points, it felt like, particularly in the biggest games as well, when they're under the most pressure, trying to get these big confidence-inducing wins. It often felt like it was Sanchez letting down the team.
On the flip side, though, last 2 months of the season, Sanchez was brilliant and probably, won Chelsea a few points as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance to it. And also, if you as we all know, we're lovers of statistics. Sanchez's statistics are great last year. It's just the big games, just the big mistakes in it, particularly in that first half of the season, as you say. But I do think a goalkeeper could make a big difference. I'm surprised. It doesn't feel like Chelsea are actually going to do this to start with, because I think Mike Maignan was the obvious tap in there. And look, they've let Joan Garcia go to Barcelona. They've let Lucas Chevalier go to PSG. James Trafford has gone to City and Ramsdale's gone to Newcastle. I'm not necessarily saying that Trafford or Ramsdale were right for Chelsea, but they haven't really engaged in this goalkeeping market so far. The player I think they should go for is Diogo Costa out of FC Porto. I am more confused why the likes of PSG and the likes of Barcelona weren't keener on this deal. I imagine it was price, because Joan Garcia had a very achievable release clause. Luis Campos has got great relationships with Lille, having worked there for PSG, so maybe that helped smooth the Chevalier change as well. But Diogo Costa has been starting regularly for FC Porto for the last 4 seasons. He's also had some exceptional moments with Portugal. He's close to 40 caps now for Portugal. He was their starting goalkeeper in the Euros. He had that phenomenal game against Slovenia in the last 16 of the Euros, where he saved this amazing one-on-one against Benjamin Šeško, which I keep seeing on Twitter, actually, with people criticising Šeško on the back of that. It was just a great save. And then he saved 3 penalties in the shootout. Even in, I think it was June, the Nations League final against Spain, saves Morata's penalty. Portugal win the Nations League. Huge moment for the nation. And over the last 4 seasons, his save percentage has never dropped below 71%. In those 4 seasons starting for Porto, he's never had a negative XG season. So he's always prevented, and it's always a bit loose, this prevented XG term, but he's never underperformed in terms of shots you'd expect him to save. And he's actually accumulated close to 13 XG saved in those 4 seasons. Robert Sanchez last year was the first season in which he's had a positive XG season in terms of goals prevented in the last 4 years. So it does feel like there's a notable gap in quality there. Diogo Costa is not 30. He's not 28. He's not 29. He's in the middle of his 20s. And Chelsea, I think, eventually just sign a slightly more experienced centre-back, a slightly more experienced goalkeeper. And there's very few reasons where, if Gittins and Xavi Simons and Hato adapt, and João Pedro and Delap to this Chelsea side quite quickly, that you wouldn't say this is a title-winning potentially squad the season after, even if this year is more about getting 80 points and having a run in the Champions League, at least in my opinion. I'm not sure they're quite at Liverpool's level just yet. But a goalkeeper like Diogo Costa, I think, is such a solid base to go from. And he's an amazing sweeper keeper as well. Great shot stopper, as I've said, very confident with the ball at his feet. He just feels like an all-round package. And for 40, 50 million pounds, I just think it's such a good investment.
Yeah, I agree. I don't even think it's necessarily just about experience. It's just about top quality. And Diogo Costa is, one of the best out there. You think of the great Chelsea teams in the past. Petr Cech, got him in just before he, was on the trajectory of becoming one of the best keepers in the world. And at that point, great international experience for a really young goalkeeper for the Czech Republic, part of an amazing setup there. Think about Thibaut Courtois coming in, kind of, obviously on loan at Atletico Madrid initially, but then coming back in and, being such a big figure in those title-winning teams. Those are the players that I look at Chelsea, and those are the goalkeepers that I think of when I think of Chelsea's success over the last 20 years. Both of them were signed quite young. Even if they weren't super experienced at that time, they came in and had a very big presence almost instantly at Chelsea, and I feel like that's something that Diogo Costa would be capable of doing. I really like that shout. Joe?
Sounds like you're up against
I think it's difficult, to be honest with you. I think the obvious suggestion for me, and I'm really surprised it hasn't been brought up more regularly in terms of actually happening is Marc Guehi. You know, a return for Marc Guehi feels like an obvious pickup. A player who can play both sides of a central defensive partnership, a back four. And he's also operated in a back three more recently under Ole Glasner, a captain at Palace, a player who's, you know, had an upbringing at Chelsea, doesn't feel like he would cost a bucket load because he's entered the final year of his contract. But I think the news yesterday kind of just tweaked in my head a little bit of a change. I was going to suggest Marc Guehi for this move. You mentioned a player that could be involved in this transfer. Chevalier going to PSG, I think could open the door for Gianluigi Donnarumma to arrive in the Premier League. And with 1 year left on his contract at 26 years old, yes, he didn't have his best season in a PSG shirt. And actually, if you look statistically over the last couple of years, certainly his numbers have taken a little bit of a step back, particularly from save percentage angle, from a post-shot expected goals angle. Some of his claim percentages from high balls aren't particularly exceptional.
Amazing in the Champions League, though.
But, exactly. Let's talk about some of the performances we've seen in single moments and some of the commanding sort of personality he has to his game, which I think translate exactly into that Chelsea number one shirt. You spoke about players like Thibaut Courtois, like Petr Cech, who have just got a commanding presence about them. I think, as you saw against Arsenal, as you saw against Aston Villa, that can be Gigi Donnarumma at his best. And for me, our reported sort of £35 million, £40 million fee because he's entered the final year of his contract and they've bought Chevalier in or are bringing Chevalier in. I look at that transfer, I think that seems like great value in the market, given he's still only 26 years old. The one problem I potentially could foresee is that Chelsea have definitely switched up their wage structure, haven't they? They've kind of recruited longer terms on lower wages. Now, Gianluigi Donnarumma exiting PSG is on a package right now. I can't see him wanting to take too much of a step back to suddenly earning more like £150,000 a week. But I think overall, as a impactful goalkeeping arrival, Gigi Donnarumma would be one of the biggest names you could think of straight away. Immediately feels like he fits the presence. The reservation I've really got is how Enzo Maresca wants to build up from the back. We saw it at Leicester and we've seen it at times at Chelsea. Sanchez does tend to get quite involved in build-up play. Mads Hermansen, when he was at Leicester, was very involved in build-up play, probably even more than Robert Sanchez. And that isn't Gigi Donnarumma's strong suit, is it? He's not going to want to step out, be a sweeper keeper that can get involved from a higher perspective and start attacks. That's not what he's going to want to do. He's much more of a traditional shot stopper. But he is on his day. I hate that phrase, on his day. But as we saw in the Champions League, he can be a freakish shot stopper, probably the world's best shot stopper at his absolute best. I think you've got to throw his name into contention here if he's available.
Yeah, I certainly think he should be on Chelsea's list. I think it was midway through last season I suggested Gianluigi Donnarumma as a potential January signing for Chelsea, given his contract situation. And that was when he was actually struggling, particularly first half of last season, he was really struggling. But the goalkeeper situation at Chelsea at that point seemed so desperate that it was like, well, you may as well have a sniff around him because, like you say, the potential upside with Donnarumma is massive, and amazing Champions League experience now. Chelsea are going to be looking to go deep in that competition this year. But you've kind of said it there, Joe. I think skill set wise, all round skill set wise, I feel like Costa is a little bit of a better fit. And also I think Chelsea's goalkeeper situation just isn't as dire as it was. I think Sanchez over the last 4 or 5 months, especially as we saw in the Club World Cup as well, he couldn't really have done much more to stake his claim as Chelsea's number one now. And I think transitioning between Sanchez and Costa, splitting minutes between those two, that feels easier to me than a big character like Donnarumma coming in and saying to him, you know what, actually, you might have to actually earn your place as our number one, even after coming in.
Not happening.
But that feels like what could happen at Chelsea.
I think if either arrive, they'll be number one, surely.
I think eventually, but I do think a lot of faith has been shown in Sanchez, and there's lots of minutes to be had. I wouldn't be surprised, to see Chelsea sign a goalkeeper and, have them split minutes between the Champions League and the Premier League. Yeah, I can just see Costa being a bit of a better fit in that sense. I think he's got more to develop into. I think we know what Gianluigi Donnarumma is as a keeper. Costa is, I don't know, is Costa even that much younger than Donnarumma? Because Donnarumma started his career so early.
26, Donnarumma.
Yeah. But yeah, so he's a little bit younger, Costa. I just think there's a little bit more room for him to grow. Whereas Donnarumma, I don't see Donnarumma becoming a better keeper than he is already.
Okay.
So yeah,
final team.
2-1.
Manchester City.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is difficult.
It's impossible.
Man City have already recruited in a ton of areas now. They seem to have plugged a lot of the gaps that they had. We're still, yet to fully see what they're going to look like really as a team, how they're going to play in the new season. I know we saw glimpses at the Club World Cup, but I think there's going to be more development there. I'm really excited about how the midfield is going to shape up with the signings of Cherki and particularly Reinders. I think that gives them so much more legs in midfield now, and especially with Gonzalez backing up Rodri, I think City do look more solid there. But as we saw with the Aït-Nouri transfer on the left back, it does feel like Pep is going for the flying fullbacks once again. First time we've seen that in a number of years. So I'm assuming you guys have gone for a right back.
Yeah.
It's the only option, I think.
It was really difficult, though. It was really difficult. I don't think the right-back market is great right now, especially on the back of this summer, because I think for any club looking at a new player, Achraf Hakimi is the dream, but he's just won a treble at PSG. You're not getting him. Trent has just moved. Frimpong has just moved. Timber is at a relatively new club. I don't think you're going to get Ben White anytime soon. Jules Koundé's not leaving. So I think it's quite difficult to find the sort of future right-back for Man City, especially a side that have quite a unique playing style. And actually, credit where it's due, apparently Matheus Nunes, I didn't actually watch that much of the Club World Cup because I was away, but apparently he had a very solid Club World Cup. We did a transfer show with James Alcott earlier this week, who's obviously very central in the Club World Cup, or at least coverage. And he said Matheus Nunes was really, really impressive the way he was inverting so effectively and was giving a lot of support almost as an overlapper sometimes with their right winger too. But anyway, as it stands, their right back options are Matheus Nunes, Rico Lewis, John Stones could potentially play there if he's still at the club, Manuel Akanji. Anyway, it doesn't fill me with confidence in terms of a 50-game campaign. So I think they might have to do something a little bit original given the paucity of options on the market. And I wonder whether they look at someone like Konrad Laimer. Now, I said this in the office earlier and both of you went, he must be 30, 31. He's 28 and he's only just turned 28. But he's played over 40 games for Bayern in the last 2 seasons. And you might be thinking, Konrad Laimer, the midfielder. Well, actually, for Bayern, he's played double the amount of games as a right back, over double the amount of games, actually, as a right back than in central midfield. Last season, he made 43 appearances for Bayern and 40 were at right back. So he is primarily a right back these days. Kimmich is very much seen as a midfielder by company. It's kind of the other way around under Tuchel. Now it's kind of reversed. And Konrad Laimer, in terms of what he can offer, he's actually had a really solid creative year in the last year at Bayern. He was at 0.23 expected goals and assists per 90, which was the same as Theo Hernandez, who's the flying fullback of Milan previously, and it's more than Ryan Aït-Nouri, who was admittedly playing for Wolves, a far inferior side to Bayern, but is again seen as this key attacking threat. His progressive passes were over 7 per 90. Matheus Nunes is at 4.5. There, you look at his defending, he wins over 50% of his aerial duels, he's fairly solid in the tackle, and I just think that this is an option to not only play at right back, but potentially cover in midfield if you need to as well, because yes, they do have Nico Gonzalez, but Kovacic might not play as big a role this year. I mean, he's still very much there, but Gundogan probably shouldn't play as big a role this year. Bernardo Silva will eventually have to be moved on from as well. And Konrad Laimer now has a lot of experience, and having been signed for Bayern from Leipzig by Nagelsmann, who then left quite soon after his arrival, he's carved out a really useful career at Bayern. And it was Max Eberl, their sporting director, saying the other day that this is a key member of our squad. He sets the agenda during training. He's always on it. He's very committed. He can play in a variety of different roles, which might make you think, why would they let him go? But if you're Man City and you offer 30, 35 million pounds for a 28-year-old who I think has only got 3 years left on his contract as well, which is a fairly sizable amount of time, but this is his opportunity to come play in the Premier League, perhaps he'd be interested. Having said that, he's a key member of Bayern's starting 11. So it'll be a tough one to negotiate, but admittedly, I did find the right-back market for City pretty challenging.
That's tough. I guess my question to that would be, how much of a difference on Matheus Nunes is Konrad Laimer? I guess he's a bit more of a classic kind of inverted fullback, midfielder hybrid. Whereas Nunes, I think we've seen, his kind of the legs that he's got. He is someone who can really plough through midfields. So interesting one with Konrad Laimer. My one reservation would be, maybe he's a little bit too similar to the kind of profiles that we've seen crop up at fullback for City over the last 3 years, and it feels like Pep's trying to move away from that. But I like the versatility. I like the fact that he backs, he can, play backup in midfield, feels like a natural backup to the likes of Nico Gonzalez and Rodri. Has always had incredible defensive numbers, really, really intelligent player, great in transition, like has become a more solid possession player as well over the last few years as well. But Joe, do you have a more classic?
I do have a more classic suggestion. I think we should preface this with, I personally can't see City signing any of these options. You know, the most advanced felt like, could they take a Tino Livramento? That feels like that's well off the table now with the news of Alexander Isak potentially departing Newcastle. So I don't think this would happen in a million years. But if I was looking at the right back market, I think, like you said, Konrad, Laimer offers maybe something a little bit more similar to Mateus Nunes. I was looking more of an out-and-out right back that could even get on the outside, a bit akin to Ryan Aït-Nouri, but on the flip. So when one was available, they wanted to juxtapose the fullbacks. I was potentially thinking, could Pedro Porro become an option here? Now, I know that he's under long contract at Tottenham Hotspur until 2028, but you know, this is a Tottenham team that finished 17th. I think if they hadn't got Champions League football, a few more names within that squad might well have been considering their futures, especially if a club like Manchester City was to come in for you. Now, Pedro Porro has previously been at Man City. Yeah, let's not forget that he spent 3 years at the club between 2019 and 2022, but a large portion of that on loan, and then eventually made that move to Sporting permanent, didn't he? But what he offers is very different to any of the right-back options Manchester City have got at the club. He's far more keen to get forward on the outside. You know, I think his shots from range would need to be quelled a little bit, but this is a player and a fullback who's in the top 10% of European fullbacks for his shot creating actions, for his expected assists, you know, for his interceptions. He ranks really, really highly. I think his intelligence of positional play off the ball is slightly underrated at times. And not only that, when I think of a Pep fullback, I think of a player has to be able to get on the ball and progress it, not just through his carrying, but for his passing. That's exactly what Pedro Porro does. You know, his progressive pass numbers are absolutely fantastic. They're amongst the best in the Premier League for a right back. So I think it's an all-round package that would provide something different to what they've got. Pedro Porro would be a pretty viable option. Where he's not going to be a viable option is I think Tottenham would price them out of the market totally. I don't necessarily think the player would, you know, be kicking up a fuss to leave Spurs at the moment, given they have got that Champions League football on the table, a new manager under Thomas Frank. But Spurs do have Jed Spence, who's potentially going to come in and get minutes this season, can offer cover on both sides. Archie Gray, the most minutes we saw of him in a single season of his professional career so far came at right back for Leeds, didn't they? So he can offer cover in that role too. So if he was to go, I think Spurs have the cover. Do I think it will happen? No, but I like the idea of Pedro Porro in this City side. I think he is quite a natural fit, and there's a reason he was at City prior to this, because his game style translates quite well to the City model.
I like that shout as well. It's difficult because, it feels difficult. It feels almost impossible that either of these transfers would happen. Maybe Konrad Laimer would be slightly more likely, given where he's at in his career, his age. Maybe, you know, his head could be turned by a new challenge abroad, perhaps. But also, it's hard to get, you know, a player out of Bayern when they're so dominant at this moment in time. I think the Vincent Kompany project is going from strength to strength. You know, most ball dominant side in Europe last year. I think top scorers in Europe last year as well. So
and that'll be tough. Many players their rivals have lost this summer, all to Premier League clubs. It's looking pretty good for them.
Yeah, looking really good, and especially for a stronger Champions League bid, potentially, if their league performance isn't going to be as challenged. I really like Pedro Porro. I do really like him. I just think stylistically, there's just a lot in Pedro Porro's game, and like, it's not just because he's at Tottenham and, you know, we're linking with City. There's so much in Pedro Porro's game where I'm like, he can fulfill all the things that Kyle Walker did so well at City for so many years. And Kyle Walker, obviously, you know, no longer at the club and really waned in his final season at the club, but really did have a lot of staying power at City. Didn't join them when he was that young, and, you know, played well into his kind of, you know, early to mid 30s.
Yeah, Porro's only 25,
and was still considered one of the best right backs in the world into his mid 30s. I feel like Pedro Porro, especially in terms of his progressive passing, like you talk about, I think is even more impressive than Kyle Walker's was at his age, and his ability to get forward. I just think it would be really, really exciting in the City side.
Okay.
Yes, that City DNA.
Joe
so I'm
wins.
afraid 3-1 to Joe in the end.
Oh, Very one-sided, although I do think Alexander Isak was a bit of a tap-in.
It was.
To be honest,
Yeah.
but
So is Eze.
So, yeah. Guys, before I let you go, I'm actually going to get my own revenge. We've got to talk. We will do a full predictions episode, by the way, but we've talked about the signing that could win your side the title. I just want to quite quickly get who you think is actually going to win the title as it stands. Mikey.
It's really hard to look past Liverpool. It's really, really hard to look past Liverpool. I guess the one reservation is, and especially if they sign Isak as well, is that there is a lot of change in that forward line, and no matter how good the talent is, you can't just expect that forward line to gel instantly. Arne Slot did an amazing job, last year with the attack, but Salah did a lot of heavy lifting, and all the other players there were already kind of used to, swapping out with each other. I think Cody Gakpo also had a big upturn last year on the left, although he was super, super impressive. But yeah, Arne Slot's got a challenge there, like in terms of really gelling that attack quickly. But otherwise, that squad is so settled. Like I say,
I would be their closest challenger.
I think Arsenal probably. Maybe I'm playing it safe again because again, quite a settled squad, and they've just clearly upgraded in 2 or 3 positions. Whereas with Chelsea and City, there's just a lot more surgery that's being done on their squads. City in particular, going into a new era. And also it feels like, I don't know, with Man City, it feels kind of like the pressure's off a little bit. Chelsea, I feel like the pressure's almost maybe a little bit more on to be in a serious title challenge, given the money spent and the talent coming into the club. But yeah, I feel like it's clearly Arsenal and Liverpool for me. Things could change, of course, between now and the start of the season, or between now and the end of the window. But yeah, right now.
Joe doesn't look so sure.
Yeah, I think Man City will be... Yeah, I might say Man City.
To win the league?
Yeah,
the league, really?
I might say Man City. I just don't see worlds in which Pep has 2 down seasons. I think Pep always figures out a way. He always tweaks something, bounces back in a certain realm. I think some of the business, whilst it has been... scattergun to some level, has been done extremely early. He's had these players done, at Club World Cup early. I think there were signs at the Club World Cup of real positivity for Manchester City. The return of Rodri immediately, for me, pushes them back up to being extremely serious title contenders. I think Pep is such a genius that he will find a way to be involved in this title race extremely deep, especially with the return of Rodri. So whilst Liverpool on paper, I think the obvious choice in terms of closest contender or most serious, I'm actually going to say Man City.
Fair. My doubts about Man City are the right back area, as well as Matheus Nunes played in the Club World Cup. And I think Kevin De Bruyne is a massive absentee. Even if Cherki and Foden, if Foden gets back to his best, let's see. But Cherki and Foden will have to step up at a serious level to replicate De Bruyne's success, even in the last couple of years where De Bruyne's been injured regularly. I just think that is really massive. And as for the closest to Liverpool, who I'm backing to win it, I'm going Arsenal. I think Arsenal have had a really, really good summer. I think people made far too much of the Madueke signing, even though he's not the player that I would have gone for myself. I think they look very, very settled. And then Liverpool...
It's impossible to look past Liverpool.
It's impossible to look past Liverpool. I mean, you just did, but I think the Diogo Jota factor could be potentially pretty massive. Like that could be a huge emotional, devastation on the players, no doubt. Obviously, that goes without saying, but it could galvanise them. It could really, upset the environment there. Obviously, it's a huge, huge factor that shouldn't be underplayed. But I do think Liverpool have had close to a perfect summer so far and could be adding the Premier League's most complete striker as well.
Do either of you give Chelsea a chance?
Not for me. I think if they had a better goalkeeper, I think they get closer. But you're still looking at Gittins and Xavi Simons being new, having to adapt to the league. You're still looking at João Pedro and Delat making a step up. You're looking at Estevao being new to the league. It just, again, feels like they've shopped in much better areas and signed much more experienced players than in previous years, but there's still a lot of change there for me for a title challenge.
I think Chelsea could be serious underdogs. I still think that certain positions, they are extremely strong. I think Caicedo is maybe the best midfielder in the league in that role. Obviously Rodri returning takes the throne off him, but last season, I think you have to talk about him being that name. I think Palmer, if he can step back up to his goal-scoring output of first season and first half of last season, scary sort of sight. And honestly, Maresca has really impressed me. I think tactically in certain big games, he has shown an ability to adapt his tactics to target opposition's weak points really, really well. So I wouldn't have them as leading candidates, but certainly they have the ability to suddenly just go on an extremely consistent run if a couple of these players, if João Pedro clicks up front, they're going to be a real problem.
Yeah, I think that's going to be key. If they can settle on a centre forward who's then linking up with Palmer every single weekend, and a bit like what Jackson was doing with Palmer last year, but across the season, then that will be a huge factor.
Guys, let us know your top 4 predictions in the comments. Let us know what you guys thought of our signings to win your side the title as well. Get all your thoughts in the comments, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for watching.